Good morning, everyone. My name is Deb Fewster. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Victorian Council of Social Service, known to many of you as VCOSS. Thanks so much for joining us today. And before I begin, I'd like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country. So I'm here in the VCOSS office this morning in Exhibition Street in Melbourne, in Naarm. And so I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I like to pay my respects to ancestors and elders and extend my respects to any First Nations colleagues who are on this call today. VCOSS conducts its business on sovereign unceded Aboriginal land. We are a very strong supporter of treaty, and if you would like to know what that means, there's lots of information online, including a copy of VCOSS's organisational pledge to support treaty. So please hop online and take a look at that if you'd like to know more information. An accessibility note, as we get underway today, if you do require closed captions, you can turn them on within Zoom. If you're not quite sure how to do that, please just put a message into the chat function here, and the VCOSS team behind the scenes will help you out with some advice and tips on how to switch on closed captions. So as I said, welcome this morning to everyone. We have had a really terrific response to this information forum that we're running today on the Victorian Early Leaver Connection Initiative. There's around, I think, 85 people registered from the community sector this morning, which I guess demonstrates just how relevant this initiative is to the community sector, particularly our members who work with children, young people and their families. We know how important that education context is. So the reason we're here today is that the Victorian Government has invested $91 million into this new Victorian Early Leaver Connection Initiative. And the purpose of that, or the intention, is to help early school leavers stay engaged in education and training and successfully complete Year 12 or an equivalent qualification. I don't need to tell you and our audience here how important it is in terms of that senior secondary attainment. We know that completing Year 12 or equivalent improves a young person's life outcomes. Those who don't complete, sadly, tend to experience poor employment prospects, lower wages, more health problems and other social impacts, including greater risk of justice system engagement. And I don't think any of us feel comfortable about that. And so I know that we've all got our shoulder to the wheel in terms of trying to both prevent, disrupt and respond when students are at risk of disengagement. What this initiative that we're talking about today will do is that it will provide a second chance for early school leavers to access the benefits of education and training, and it will help more young people forge a pathway to a positive future. So we've designed this session in collaboration with the Department of Education as part of our long-standing partnership agreement. This partnership recognises our sector's role, the community sector's critical role in the development of policy, the delivery of services, and the improvement of education outcomes for all Victorian students, particularly for those experiencing disadvantage. We're grateful to the department for all the time and energy that they've put into preparing for today's session. Just a bit of housekeeping before I do hand over to the department. Today's session is being recorded, and the reason that we're doing that is that we know it's often difficult for colleagues in the sector to attend an event in real time, particularly for those in client-facing roles. So by recording this session, it just provides more people with access to this important information post the event today. In terms of our agenda, we will have a presentation from Megan Kerr. Megan is the Director of Policy Design and Coordination at the department. Megan's going to provide some background on the senior secondary reform landscape in Victoria, and then an overview of this particular initiative that we're talking about today. She's then going to discuss the new supports for early school leavers, including the Career Advice Service, the targeted supports available to early school leavers who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, as well as early school leavers who have a disability. And Megan will also provide information about funding for strengthened Year 12 completion pathways in TAFEs. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. As I said, we've got a strong turnout. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers after the presentation. Those questions will be moderated by a team of VCOSS and departmental staff. Given how many people we've got on the call, if there's a lot of questions there, it's a chance that we won't get to all of those. So I just want to make a commitment to you that any outstanding questions that we don't get to today, we'll take on notice and we will follow up after the meeting. We'll make sure that everyone who's registered for this event has access to the answers to those questions. So final bit of housekeeping, please submit your questions during the Q&A using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat function. So please use the Q&A box to submit any questions. And without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Megan. So thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you, Deb. And if everyone can bear with me just for a moment while I set up my screen to share. Great. So thank you very much, Deb and VCOSS, and good morning to you all. I'm really excited to be here today and really excited about the, I think, 50 plus people we have on the call. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the Wurundjeri land and to pay my respect to elders past, present, and extend that to any Aboriginal people who are on the call with us today, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. As Deb mentioned, my name is Megan Kerr and I'm Acting Director of Policy Design and Coordination in the Senior Secondary Pathways Reform Task Force at the Department of Education. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Rose Wilson-Harrison, who will be one of the moderators of the Q&A session that we have later on. But really thrilled to be able to present to you about the new initiative that Deb mentioned, the Victorian Early Leaver Connection Initiative, or VELCI. It's a hard C there. And it's an initiative focused on young people who are still school age but have left school before completing Year 12. Really important to note that from the outset around this target cohort, and it was specifically designed for this target cohort, not those who are chronically disengaged but are still enrolled in school. It's for those students who have disengaged and are no longer enrolled in their school setting. And the rationale for that is because there are supports already in place for young people who are enrolled in but disengaged from their school. And through our work that we've done, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we identified that there's a gap in the system for those students that needs to be filled for those young people no longer enrolled in school. As Deb mentioned, we plan to cover a few points during the session, so I'll provide a really brief context of the senior secondary reforms in Victoria and how we got to where we are now, an overview of VELCI, detail on the new VELCI supports and funding for strengthened Year 12 completion pathways in TAFEs, non-school providers, as many would know in the room, and then how we can work together to build awareness of VELCI and support implementation. The initiative went live in February, so it's still in its early stages. But we're really excited to be able to share this with you. I'm hoping I can answer many of the questions that have come through already during the registration process in the presentation, but absolutely, as Deb mentioned, there will be a Q&A session at the end, and so really put those questions into the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we can get through as many as we can. So let me move over here. So the senior secondary reform context, for those who aren't familiar, really started in 2022 when there was a review conducted into vocational applied learning in senior secondary schooling. It was conducted by John Firth, who is a former CEO of the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority and very much a part of our education landscape in Victoria, and is commonly known as the Firth Review. And the review made 38 recommendations to lift quality and access to applied learning programs in school so that students are supported to build knowledge and skills that they need to successfully move into their chosen post-school pathway. And as a result of that review, the Senior Secondary Pathways Reform Task Force, of which myself and my colleague Rose are a part of, was set up to respond and implement the Firth recommendations within the Department of Education. And we do that in partnership with our colleagues in the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority, or the VCAA, who have stewardship of particularly the senior secondary certificates that many students in Victoria complete, and the ones that we are trying to ensure complete through initiatives such as VELCI. So this slide really kind of represents how we are approaching the reforms. We see the secondary school engagement as a journey for students, and it really goes from that year 7 through to year 12 with career education critical to supporting students to explore their own pathway. It begins in those kind of year 7s and 8s where you'll have career discussions, industry tours, you may have some early exploratory opportunities at a career expo. Students then in year 9 and 10 start to become much more informed around what they might want to do post-school and to help support decisions in their senior secondary years. So many people in the room would know about the Moresby career assessment tool and the My Career Insights, which all Victorian Government schools and students in year 9 are encouraged to complete that. And so that helps again to make those decisions as they move through. And students then start exploring in work experience and also vocational explorers and vet tasters. And that's really a part of that year 9 and 10 experience. And some in year 10 may even start commencing their senior secondary program. And then in year 11 and 12 is when the sort of a change happens, again, another transition for those students into their senior secondary program. And probably what many of you in the room would be aware of is one of the biggest changes related to the senior secondary pathways reform is the introduction of the VCE vocational major and the Victorian Pathways certificate. So really broadening out the options for students. And then as those students complete their year 12, whether it's within school or through what I will talk about later, the non-school providers in TAFEs, those students then and young people then go on to whether it's a training, education or employment pathway. And we really see that what we want and the aspiration for Firth is around an integrated careers and pathways system that looks at improving access to and perceptions of vocational applied learning alongside other types of learning within a school setting, and ensuring that all students find the right post-school pathway that aligns with their strengths and their interests and their aspirations. And really important through the Firth recommendations, and he made several recommendations related to this, that we better support young people who leave school early to find their right post-school pathway. And it's those recommendations that have formed the basis of the work we're presenting on today. So a little context for Victorian early school leavers, and many of you in the room I know would be working really closely with these young people. But last year the department looked at the best available data, which has at times been really a challenge to gather. And so we're relying on departmental surveys and other consultations direct with young people to fill that available data set. We conducted a literature review, and as just mentioned, we consulted widely to understand how to support early school leavers in Victoria. And so looking at our data, our on-track data, the survey findings relating to non-completers suggest that early school leavers often find themselves in employment, and particularly in the kind of food, hospitality and tourism and building and construction industries. We also know that our data on young people of compulsory school age who are exempted from school, which means that they were approved to leave school before they turned 17. That shows that majority are male. And the most common pathway for those young people that are exempted is into an apprenticeship or a traineeship. So from research and consultation, we identified a long-standing support gap for our school-aged young people who leave our schools early to pursue another full-time pathway and who no longer have the wraparound protective and supportive structures of a school. Now, these young people, as you know and we know, are some of our most vulnerable. They might be couch surfing, working part-time, have caring responsibilities. At the same time as doing all of that, they're trying to figure out how to complete a vet certificate or their VCE with their local TAFE. And without support, they are some of our at most risk students of falling through that gaps between the school system, which has supported them up until a certain point, and then the post-school education and training systems. And so as part of designing VELCI, we wanted to understand more what that experience was for early school leavers. So we arranged discussion groups with young people who had recent lived experience of leaving school early. They told us what the supports were that they wished was in place when they were at school. And if I can quote one young person on the slide, you can see, I like the idea of an individual contact, a message per week to check on how you're going and to make sure you're not drowning in the ocean. For us, the key takeaway from the research was the importance of meeting these young people where they're at. And this has informed the design of VELCI and the new supports for our early school leavers. And I mentioned earlier that the target cohort for VELCI is young people who have left school, not those disengaged young people who are still enrolled in school. And so before I kind of move to talking about VELCI in more detail, I'd like to provide a bit of background to explain this. Many of you would be aware that in Victoria, schooling is compulsory for students aged 6 and up to 17 years, unless an exemption has been granted. And the legislative instrument which we use, Ministerial Order 705, establishes the requirements for a decision maker to exempt a student from school into full-time education, training and/or employment pathways. And I think it's really important to emphasise the full-time component of that requirement. So an exemption cannot be granted for a student to participate in transition to work or reconnect or similar programs. An exemption must be for a full-time education, training and/or employment pathway. Government schools are accountable for checking in with exempted young people at different stages. I'll move over, hold on, let me go back to that slide. Government schools are accountable for checking in with exempted young people at stages of 1, 3 and 6 months after they've left school to ensure that the young person has made a successful transition into their chosen pathway. And the VELCI supports that I'll talk to offer an additional support of independent assistance that are complementary to those school follow-ups. So like the school follow-ups, they're designed to support exempted young people to make a transition into their approved full-time pathway. So with that context in mind, I'll explain to you all the VELCI supports. So as Deb mentioned, the VELCI is a $91 million investment in better outcomes for young people who leave school early, helping them stay engaged in education and training and complete Year 12. As someone who's previously worked in these spaces, that investment is really significant and really shows, I think, a demonstration of commitment to ensuring, as I mentioned earlier with the Firth review, that all young people are engaged in education and training and have that opportunity to complete Year 12. So VELCI includes new systems and processes for government schools to support school exemption practice and to promptly identify and target support to those young people who leave school early and then later disengage from their approved full-time education and training. They're not the focus for today's presentation, but they are an important part of the VELCI picture, and hopefully at another point in time in the year, we'll be able to come and talk back with yourselves around what those particular practices and systems are. But the focus of today's presentation, as you're aware, is the new youth focus support for early school leavers. And this includes career advice and other individualised support such as mentoring, which are available in target areas for Koorie young people and young people with disability. Finally, VELCI also includes the strengthened Year 12 completion pathways through a new funding model and service expectation for TAFEs, delivering foundation and senior secondary certificates. These are the ones I mentioned earlier, the VCE vocational major and Victorian pathways certificate. And we're really excited to see these come together to support early school leaders in Victoria. So the first support I want to talk about is the Career Advice Service. So as of February 2025, exempted young people in Victoria can access the Career Advice Service through their local skills and job centre. The Career Advice Service, or CAS as we are calling it, is available statewide via the 14 skills and job centres. And I'm sure you're familiar with the SJCs, which have provided valuable free and practical advice and support on study and employment opportunities for Victorians for many years. SJCs, as noted above, are located on TAFE and dual sector university campuses, but they primarily service an adult cohort. So the VELCI Career Advice Service introduces a dedicated career practitioner in those 14 SJCs to provide youth-focused outreach and career advice to school-aged young people. Essentially, it picks up from the point of exiting school when the support provided through the school largely concludes, and it aims to help young people to securely transition to their approved pathway through those regular check-ins and referral support. The services focuses on our school age cohort, recognising that the needs may look very different to adults accessing SJC services. Now, the priority for the CAS is exempted young people who are still under 17 years old. I mentioned earlier that we know that's a gap in provision. Then following that is young people who are completing their 12 in the TAFE via the TAFE non-school provider. And where capacity allows, the CAS can pick up other young people up to age 20 who have left school without completing year 12. We are really looking at a no wrong door policy for those students who have not completed year 12 but are considered early school leavers. So it doesn't matter what school the young person comes from, whether it's government, independent, Catholic, all students who fit that eligibility can be supported. However, as mentioned earlier, those students that are still enrolled in a school are not eligible, as those students have supports in other forms. It's also worth reiterating here that students cannot be exempted into a VELCI support. An exemption, as mentioned earlier, is around exempted into a full-time education, training and employment pathway. And this is similar to how an exemption cannot be granted, as mentioned, around into transition to work or reconnect or similar employment services and providers. So additional to those supports are individual supports available for early school leavers who are Koorie or have a disability. Now, this is a part of a pilot approach for these cohorts, hence the focus at the moment on school leavers who are Koorie or have disability. These supports are available in areas with the highest need based on, again, the department's available data and also an informed by consultation with our regional and area colleagues. Eligible for these individual supports is this eligibility is the same as the career advice service. So these are students who have been exempted from school into a full-time pathway, but participants must be Koorie and or have disability. Now, like the CAS, these supports aim to assist early school leavers with the initial transition from school into their chosen pathway and focus on supporting the young people to stay engaged in that pathway. The supports are more localised than the CAS, though. They are delivered by a range of local community organisations and TAFEs, and they have been tailored by those organisations to meet the local need and the cohort of young people they are servicing. So in keeping with the evidence of what works to support early school leavers and what we heard from our early school leavers themselves, the supports are individualised and flexible and range from mentoring programs and peer group activities through to case management support and service navigation. Exempted young people in the relevant areas can benefit from both the CAS and targeted support. And I'll give an example. In Bendigo, the Skills and Jobs Centre and the Bendigo and District Aboriginal Cooperative have been working together to provide qualified youth-focused career advice service through the SJC, plus additional wraparound support and mentoring to more than 20 early school leavers who identify as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. Our evaluation of the CAS and targeted supports will reflect how well this is delivering, how well this delivery is working, and what we can learn from these differentiated approaches that are local to the providers and what those providers have taken to meeting the needs of their cohort in their local area. And it's important to note, as part of our $91 million investment, we have a significant evaluation which we're commencing shortly alongside this to make sure that we're really understanding from the outset of implementation what the implementation is looking like, what's working well, what isn't, how we can course correct as needed, and what we can do to inform potential expansions of all initiatives as we're going through. So I wanted to mention just quickly the referral pathway. We know how important the initial transition is out of school in setting early school leavers up for success. So we want to make sure that early school leavers are connected to the VELCI supports upon their exit from school. Schools are now being strongly encouraged to make a referral to the career advice service whenever an exemption from school is approved. Doesn't matter which pathway the young person is going into. If the young person is formally exited from school and still under 20 years old, a referral can be made to the CAS. For example, they may be leaving school early to an apprenticeship or a traineeship, a vet certificate or TAFE, a vet certificate TAFE, or into employment. When they receive their referral, the CAS practitioner will seek consent to provide the service. Where consent is granted, the CAS can commence regular check-ins to ask the young person how they're doing, provide that qualified career training and education advice sessions, answer questions and help the young person solve problems that may impact their engagement, help the young person connect with other support organisations if they need, including just targeted support programs available in their area. I think that's a really important point that we want to address here, that this CAS service really becomes a contact for that young person to connect into other supports, which I hazard a guess in the room, there are many that you are providing. And so really important for you to understand the CAS and what your role can be in that. So our call to action really is, if you work for an organisation that could play a role in supporting these young people after they've left school, get in touch with your local skills and job centre. We'll have details of providers for both the career advice service and targeted support within this presentation, but also available on the VELCI website. Now I'd like to speak to you about our work supporting early school leavers who go on to complete Year 12 at a TAFE. Now, we know, and for the Department of Education and for us as an education system, schools are the principal and preferred provider of secondary education to students. But we also know that there are in limited circumstances where leaving school is in the best interest of some young people. And so those young people are often exempted into TAFEs to complete their Year 12. That includes the VCE vocational major and the Victorian Pathway Certificate. In 2025, there are approximately 1,300 school-age young people who are undertaking their senior secondary certificate and their foundational certificate in the VPC across 12 TAFEs. Most of those are aged 17 and above. Now, we know, as Deb mentioned, the evidence is really clear that completing Year 12 leads to better social, health and financial outcomes as compared to non-completion. And completing Year 12 at a TAFE often is giving those young people the best chance of success in continued education and training. So we've introduced additional funding and service requirements for TAFEs that are delivering Year 12. The intention is for this to support our TAFE partners to ensure that their Year 12 completion pathways are supportive and quality options for young people, and that they're able to cater for the needs of that small but vulnerable cohort of students. And those engagements with those TAFEs are kicking off now, and we're really excited to see how that works, what we can learn from them and what they can learn from each other. So this brings me to sort of the close of what we're wanting to chat about, and then really opening up to the Q&A session. But what we wanted to talk to you, and how you as VCOSS members can potentially support and build awareness of the work. You and your organisations play a key role in supporting many young people to remain engaged in education, training, employment. And we are really keen to have you get this message out and understand what we're asking here. The key message really is for the sector. If a school-age young person has been exempted from school enrolment and attendance in Victoria, they can be referred to the career advice service at their closest skills and job centre. And through that, they will be connected into the targeted supports should there be a student who is Aboriginal, or a student or a young person with disability. So to guide you, we've set up a few common scenarios that may come up as VELCI begins to be implemented, and these are ones that we are aware of. So when you come across a young person who has an approved exemption from school and is under 17, or is over 17 and has formally exited school before completing Year 12, you can refer them to the relevant career advice service. When you come across a young person, though, who is still enrolled in school, as mentioned, they are not eligible for the service, and we suggest that they you contact the school and understand more about the situation of that young person. If you're unsure about eligibility, contact the Career Advice Service, who can provide further advice. I'd also encourage you to engage with with the department's regional and area teams, who provide excellent advice and support for young people in those situations where they may be exempted from school, but also where they're still enrolled in school. We have many programs, as you would know. These slides include the relevant links with further contact details, and they'll be circulated as part of the session. And Deb, that brings me to the end of our presentation. I thank everyone for listening, and yeah, really excited to hear the Q&A that will follow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan. That was just such a comprehensive presentation, and thank you for, I guess, engaging with some of the questions that were coming through from community sector organisations as they registered for this event, because I think you covered a lot of great ground in terms of the things that are top of mind for community sector organisations supporting students at risk. And welcome kind of more questions, again, as I mentioned earlier, through the Q&A box. A couple of comments from me before I start throwing to questions. I guess one of the things that I want to start with before we throw to questions is just acknowledging the origin story of the VELCI. And I think what I really want to do is just shout out to John Firth, shout out to the department as well for, I guess, deeply engaging with expert community sector organisations who are there at the coalface, supporting very vulnerable students and their families and carers. And I think that we can see many of those conversations over many years now kind of written through the story that you've just told, Megan. So it's very kind of, I guess, affirming for the sector to see the department really leaning into, this new, package of support. And thank you as well for explaining very clearly like who the target cohort is for the VELCI as well. That's really helpful for us, and that broader kind of contextualisation of where this sits in the kind of suite of supports for students, families, and carers, and for our sector and for schools themselves. One of the things that I guess I was kind of curious about, there are some questions coming through about that interface with the community sector. And one question that I had, Megan, was just around those referral pathways. So firstly, again, thank you for acknowledging the community sector as an important source of referrals to that new careers advice service that will be located at the Jobs and Skills Centres. I'm just wondering about, in terms of what you've kind of been piloting so far and what you're thinking about in terms of the detailed design, what capacity will there be for like warm referrals? So, will the referrals look like, something via an email, via a phone call? I'm just wondering about the opportunity for that relational work when community sector organisations might have been working with a young person for quite some time, have a lot of context, and I guess wanting to be involved in like a warm referral, warm handover of that young person to really set them up for success with their engagement with the careers advice service. Have you got any kind of comments about how you see that working?
Yeah, I do. I will just start, Deb, by also acknowledging John Firth and the commitment of that review as well. I many years ago worked in out-of-home care in the department, and just think about what we were doing 11, 12, 13, 14 years ago and where we are now. It really is a strong commitment, and I've seen that happen over that time, and so agree, really, really great to be able to provide this service for those young people, but also to introduce it to a sector who I know has been supporting these students a long time as well. So I think the warm referral part has actually come up a number of times when we've been talking about this initiative in the context with our regional and area teams, who do provide a lot of direct support to young people and to schools. I think the answer at the moment is we are in the early stages of implementation of this. And I mentioned before the kind of, essentially a no wrong door policy, which we do want to take with this. My advice would be in those instances that, the school still really has accountability for students and young people who are enrolled in a school. So I think for me, it's really a case of looking at the student, what the services are, what's been around, and kind of just making sure you're connecting into whether it's the area-based team in the department who can help understand where the right place for the student might be and what the options are. And we really, I think, in those cases are taking a bit more of a case-by-case basis. So obviously, you know, we have the eligibility criteria here specific as we identify this as a gap, but working with students who are vulnerable, it's not often a case of, you know, it starts here and stops there. There are definitely those kind of situations where people may come into the pathway and into the service in different ways. And I think my advice would be for community sector members, if you do have young people that you're unsure, I think it is worth just either checking with the SJC around the eligibility, but also checking with the area and regional teams within the department around what support's in there and the school. So I think for us, you know, there's an official form which is part of this process, because obviously we want to make sure that when we're setting up the SJCs to provide the service, they have all the information they need to be able to do that. But I think on those sort of cases where there is maybe it hasn't gone through the official channels, I think, you know, for me, really that is a conversation between the relevant local service provider. So whether it's the local service provider in the community sector chatting to the school contact, whether that's the wellbeing staff in a school, career advisor, whoever sort of the contacting with the school is. And I noticed there is a question around who in the school is this? You know, we find predominantly these kind of particular exemptions are sitting within you know, they are signed off obviously by the principal, but there are a few staff members within a school who do engage in an exemption process. And so really kind of finding the right contact, but often an area-based team from the Department of Education can really help you within the school context of understand who that is. So I think as we're moving through the early implementation, we are going to find more and more of those warm handovers as while the schools sort of get used to this is the new system. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And I did, I was just going to, I guess, make a point or flag as well. I think that as this, you know, as this initiative really, you know, takes root, it will be great to kind of like see how sector and schools are kind of engaging with it and with young people themselves, and thinking about, you know, is there a need or is there value from, you know, information sharing between, you know, the careers advice service and not just with the schools, but also community sector, and what would be the kind of the parameters or bounds around that in terms of consent, privacy, appropriate kind of use of information, but in terms of like driving towards kind of good outcomes and looking at kind of impact, I think that would be something down the track to be, you know, looking at, and maybe just to plant a seed now, it's something to be kind of like be mindful of about what's an appropriate kind of place and space for information sharing in the context of this initiative. In terms of just the referral of a student who has exemption from school, I noticed there's a question that's come in that says, I found that schools are concerned with privacy around what details they're able to provide the VELCI provider or the Jobs and Skills Centre. Is there the ability for DT to the department, to create an official referral form for the schools to trust and use? I think you were saying, Megan.
There is an official form, and that has to reassure at least the community orgs online that has been prepared in consultation with our legal division and our privacy division, particularly for those reasons. I think, again, I'd probably just say this is a little bit about the infancy of the program within the school setting and being aware that those things are, they are. We have had that, and we need to do probably at this instance it's a bit more work with our schools and area teams around ensuring they've got the confidence that it is within the remit and they are able to provide that. So there is an official form on there to support the referral, and that has been, just to give reassurance, that has been sought advice from and provided advice from our legal and privacy.
Thanks, Megan. I might just group a few of the questions that are coming through around the careers advice service, given that that's where we've kind of like started with. So the careers advice service that will be that is going to be at the Jobs and Skills Centres. So Megan, I was really kind of impressed by what you were talking about in your presentation about the fact that these Jobs and Skills Centres historically been configured to be, you know, supporting an adult cohort, and that you've really thought about, you know, in locating the careers advice service in this, you know, this existing kind of infrastructure, the need for a youth specialist, you know, workforce. So that's really fantastic. I'm wondering if you can kind of comment on some of the other kind of like capabilities, skill sets, experiences that might be required. So there's a question here, for example, around the neurodivergent community. And so question is, are there specialist staff who can help the neurodivergent community access this career advice? I guess it'd be interesting to hear, Megan, about what skills and capability are located in the careers advice service and what skills and capability there is located in schools as well, because I know there's been a lot of investment in building disability inclusion capability in our state education system. So yeah, perhaps if you could comment on that, please.
Yeah, so as you would have seen on the slide, the coverage is for the targeted services is not statewide, and there's different services in different areas for based on need. So essentially, for where there's targeted support for young people, where there is a targeted support for a person with disability within that, the provider can access the supports via TAFEs and others, and sort of just draw on the services that are around. I think it's a really good point around capability and ensuring that capability is there. The department, as you mentioned, Deb, has done major reforms in inclusive education. We have the Diverse Learners Hub as an example that sits within our region and areas across the department. So there is absolutely opportunity for us to make sure that there's connection between the CAS and those, and ensure that those capabilities are built. The process to identify where the targeted supports was done was through an expression of interest, a grant process. So those providers were asked to demonstrate capability and need in specific areas to do with the priority cohort. So we feel confident at this point that there's been a demonstration of capability by those providers through that process, and we've intentionally gone with providers who can demonstrate that capability. But agree, there's a real opportunity, I think, as we're moving through this, to ensure that those staff who are in those who are providing those services continually remain connected to current practice and are able to build their capability in that space. So they're intentionally selected for those to provide that service. But yeah, absolutely acknowledge there is a need to ensure that we continue building that capability throughout.
Megan, I'm going to jump to another question, which is just around, again, like scope and who can benefit from this initiative. So you've been really clear in articulating that this is an initiative for early school leavers. It's not for students who are highly disengaged but still have that formally enrolled, because there's another suite of initiatives for that cohort. But just recognising that this kind of cohort of students that we're talking about isn't just held by state education system, but also there has been huge growth in what's variously called complementary settings, special assistance schools. Many of these schools are operated by community sector organisations, many of whom would be on this call today. And so there is a question, or really it's a comment, which is that I would like to ensure that this is available to independent schools, not just Department of Education schools. Are you able to kind of talk about that in terms of like referrals and who's eligible?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for those who are those providers operating on the line would know that the department's exemptions policy is cross-sectoral. So it is a policy that relates to government schools and non-government schools. And so VELCI itself aligns with that. And so the supports are available for students in a Victorian Government school, an independent school, a Catholic and other denomination schools. So it is a cross-sectoral initiative intentionally to align with what is the department's policy on exempting students from schools.
Thank you. That will be very much welcomed by the person who asked that question, I'm sure, and others in the same boat. There's a question as well about if schools are accountable to check on student attendance. The comment is, I'm aware of numerous students whose attendance is not checked. I know of parents who have to initiate contact. How is this process going to be improved with this new VELCI program?
Well, it's interesting. So the part that I'm kind of didn't talk about probably addresses that a little bit more. So yes, absolutely. I mentioned the 1, 3 and 6 month requirements of a school to do that follow-up. And there are some really challenging aspects of that follow-up. But we are, as part of the broader suite of VELCI initiatives, which when I'm able to talk more about it, I would love to come back. It really is around strengthening those systems and processes to ensure that we can kind of reduce the administrative burden on schools and on others who are involved in that kind of follow-up process, and then able to kind of really understand more about where a student is. A lot of it is kind of not surprising, I'm sure, to people in the room. It's actually a data piece, and really understanding, ensuring schools are using the systems that are in place to record where a student goes, and that the school staff and other area and region staff who have responsibility are able to then find those young people in a more timely way. So there's a piece of work that sits within VELCI, which, as I mentioned, I will come back and talk about when I can, which is really around strengthening those data processes to ensure that what information that a school is using is the most up-to-date information about where a young person is or where they were, and then being able to do that follow-up. For those in the room, schools are required to do those follow-up, and it is tied to their career education funding. So there is a requirement within a school to do that, but yes, absolutely acknowledge that across the state that practice can be varied, and that does then obviously have an impact on that young person. So this sort of suite of programs that include the improvements to system and processes really around to kind of tighten that up and hold schools accountable and make sure that those young people are getting the supports that they need. So keep me on the hook for that one. I will come back and talk about that when I'm in a position to be able to.
And in terms of keeping you on the hook, well, there's not so much about keeping on the hook, but I guess what I would probably say is that there are many people that are on this call today that have got lots of ideas, insights, really high value kind of perspectives to share. And so as you're still kind of progressing some of that design work, I'm not sure exactly what stage it's at, but we'd be very happy at VCOSS to be kind of a conduit for any kind of insights or feedback or ideas that that community sector might want to share with you as you're kind of doing that detailed work. And I guess I'd also say that to all the people on the call that, we've got a really important role to play in supporting students, families, schools, the department, as, VELCI really starts to become embedded in providing kind of insights as part of, being part of an active learning system and, implementing something really kind of innovative. It'll be really important that we're feeding into any kind of, I guess, monitoring and evaluation work the department's doing. So we always stand ready to provide that support, Megan. Conscious of time, there's a couple more questions that I've got on the screen. If you've got any final questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box. There's a series of questions here, Megan, around how will community supports be engaged. One of the questions is, who will have the responsibility of coordinating additional needs outside of the education outcome? And then we've got a question about lens, but I might start with that question in terms of who will have the responsibility of coordinating additional needs outside of the education outcome. How do you see that working?
Yeah, I think for us, those providers of that career service really are, their role is to understand the needs of that young person, and absolutely as part of that conversation would be things that are beyond. It would be then the responsibility of that coordinator within the career advisory service to then kind of link up to those additional supports that may be required. So I think I did see this one come through as part of the registration, and there was a question around work experience as an example. And so, there would be, if the SJC in let's give an example down in Geelong, it would be the responsibility of that coordinator that's sitting within the SJC to make sure that they're connecting into those additional supports that are sitting around. So, they're really, if you thinking about the kind of, and I mentioned this in the presentation, the wraparound supports that sort of sit within a school setting, the idea is not to obviously replicate that fully, but at least to be able to give people a contact that they can then they can connect into via another support service as needed. So it really would be that that practitioner sitting within the SJC. It's really why we want to make sure that person is sitting there and they've got that contact in.
Yeah, thank you. And you just touched on one of those questions that came through about the role of local learning and employment networks. So just, just for the sake of completeness, to kind of just fully ask that question is, can LENS be involved in providing work experience for these young people once they're ready to explore employment pathways? It sounds like this is a very kind of relational approach and driving towards impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for kind of where we would see that is whoever the relevant community org is that's sitting there and can provide that. And I met with actually someone yesterday from a disability organisation who provides placements for students, and they were sort of asking how to connect into to the department, Victorian. They were an Australian organisation about connecting into the Victorian Government education settings, and again was just saying the SJCs is your first place to go for, and being able to say we are a service, we can provide this and connect in. So I think the strength of this initiative really is having that coordinator role sitting in the SJC, and then the community organisations that are sitting around it really are the kind of strength as well of being able to bring that connection in. So, taking what may happen in a school setting, but really positioning it within that SJC setting, and then making sure that those community orgs that are sitting place-based, local around where the SJC is and where that young person is are connecting into that, and they can be that conduit.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. There's one question here, Megan. It might be like quite a technical response. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure whether you might need to take it on notice and we need to come back, or you might be able to answer on the spot. But it is digging a little bit deeper into just the scope and definition around looking at students with disabilities who are eligible for additional supports. The question is disability defined for this purpose? And there is a question particularly around neurodivergent students. So are all neurodivergent students eligible, for example, students with ADHD?
Yeah, so we don't have neurodivergent young people are within scope of this, and no, you don't need a diagnosis to be able to access the services. So it's within our definition within this. That's absolutely included. Students, young people who are neurodivergent are included. Yeah.
Great. So I think the message that I'm hearing from you with this as well is that, this is really about making sure that we are providing that really specialised targeted assistance to students, that no one's kind of early school leavers, that no one's falling through the cracks and or gaps. And it's really about making sure that there are any potential barriers, just dismantling that so that people get the access to this service or this initiative and the supports that they need, which is really fantastic. It's a really obviously person-centered approach to the work. There are a couple more questions before we wrap up. One is around support for carers. So we know there's been a lot of kind of consideration of the needs of students who are in out-of-home care arrangements, whether that's kinship care, foster care, Rosie care, etc. And it is, there is a lot of responsibility and pressure that rests with carers. So there's a question here about what supports are there to support the carers of students to navigate this process. Is there any information that you've got about that?
I would just say that, the way we're kind of saying this for the service is if you've got questions and you need support and you need to connect in, it is really going to that practitioner. So the support's, I guess, more around understanding and navigating the system, and the carer, for the young person, a carer being part of those conversations and making that. So there's not specific supports through this for carers per se, but acknowledging that a young person may present as the service with a carer, that person would be involved in conversations, but we don't have specific targeted supports for the carers themselves. The focus obviously on this is ensuring that the young person is continuing on in the pathway, and as a carer being a part of that, they would be part of that journey.
Yeah. Great. And for now, the final question that we've got is the person asking the question has kind of commented about the fact that the VELCI supports are available for students in TAFE undertaking senior secondary who've been granted exemptions. And the question is, and I think the answer to this is yes, Megan, but just to confirm, can young people who've transferred to a flexible learning school from a government school as an early school leaver access VELCI?
So this is a bit of a tricky one because because school if they've been exempted from their school and they're moving into, as I mentioned earlier, that full-time pathway. And in that instance, for example, we talked about the independent school, and that was the that yes, if they're moving into an independent school, flexible learning school, but a lot of the flow programs are actually where a student is still enrolled in their school, so they're attending the flow. So it's not for students who are still enrolled, have a school enrollment, are still connected into a school and attending a flow program. So it's really for students who are exempted from school and then are potentially going into another pathway. That pathway may be a TAFE non-school provider, or that pathway may be another employment pathway, but it's not for students who are connected into and have an enrolment in a school.
Thank you for making that distinction.
It's a very important distinction.
It is.
But yes, and as I mentioned in the presentation, that notionally the idea being that those students are already available, have access to different supports within that school setting. So it's really for those kids who have been exempted from the participation.
And a good reminder to me, as someone that's been, working in and around these spaces for a really long time, like that precision of language, and because I guess thinking about those special assistance schools, they've evolved over time, from like non-senior secondary providers, flows, special assistance schools, like and their kind of legal status has kind of like changed as well in terms of being registered as an independent school, etc. But that precision of kind of language. So something that I thought was a straightforward kind of yes is actually not so simple. So thanks to the person who asked that question, and thank you for clarifying that, Megan, as well.
Really appreciate that. And we've talked a bit of a team of putting together a kind of an image that sort of says, if the student is here, this is what's available, and sort of really being clear the gap that is being filled here.
Fantastic. Well, that actually brings us to the end. That fortunately we've managed to work through all the questions that were asked. So those that were asked ahead of today, those that were asked in real time in the Q&A chat. So thanks to everyone who's attended. Thank you so much for your active participation, your interest in this initiative. And really want to say thank you to Megan for presenting today. I know, Megan, when you get up and present at these things, there's a team that works with you to prepare for the day. We've had Rose, your colleague here in the office as well, helping kind of moderate the questions and work on the planning of this event with Charlotte Newbold, our Education Policy Advisor at VCOSS. So just want to thank you, Megan, thank Rose, thank your colleagues who've been behind the scenes and the broader team working on the VELCI. Thank you so much to the VCOSS team, Charlotte Newbold, and also Amy Houston. In terms of kind of any next steps, as I mentioned at the outset, this session has been recorded. We will be providing a copy of the recording. I think we usually do a written transcript as well, and usually share PowerPoints as well from this session. So anyway, there'll be a package of material that is sent to everyone who registered post-event and more broadly on VCOSS website and through our other comms channels. Wonderful to spend the morning with you. Enjoy the rest of your day and looking forward to our next information forum with the Department of Education. Thanks so much for your support, Megan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everyone.